All right, we are going to be reading Lord of the Flies. We're going to read chapter 1 today, and basically the way it's going to work is that we have, not counting finals week, we have 5 weeks left, counting this week. So that means we have, not counting the virtual days, we have 10 meetings left before finals week. There are 12 chapters, so that means we're going to have to, there's a couple of shorter chapters that I'll be able to combine into one day. But basically, again, we're going to be reading a chapter each day. So I'm pretty sure I already told you guys, but we are not going to be doing any other long form essays. We're not going to have time for it, which I know you're not sad at all about, but we are going to be doing probably one more brief write, but that'll be it for writing. The brief write, and then obviously your research for your 20%, but we won't be doing any like long essays for Lord of the Flies. So, hello, you guys have passes or the passes? Okay, cool, thank you. Kelly, did you have one of these two or no? Okay, thank you. Okay. Anyway, so like I said, we will be reading chapter 1. We are switching from rhetorical strategies, so we're all done talking about rhetorical strategies for this year. It'll probably get something that gets brought up again next year, but you should be going into like a more in-depth look at it next year. But we're going to be switching to another literary device called an allegory. So before we start reading, also while you guys are reading, we're going to be listening to the audiobook while we're reading. No iPads, no phones, just books. So you won't need your iPads for anything today. You will need your books out. But so I'm going to go over, I'm just going to kind of explain what an allegory is. You don't have to do anything with it. I just want you guys to have a background information before we start reading the book. So you guys kind of know what to be looking for. Okay. You guys probably all know what metaphors are, yeah? We're all familiar with what a metaphor is. Difference between simile and metaphor. Simile uses like or as. Metaphor, you're saying something is something else. So an example of that would be Usain Bolt is a cheetah, right? So you're comparing two things that are not exactly the same. So Usain Bolt isn't literally a cheetah, but they both are quick. So that's why we're making that comparison between the two of them by saying one is the other thing. So that's what a metaphor is. An allegory is like an extended metaphor that applies to an entire story. So it's basically, for Lord of the Flies, what is the whole story a metaphor for, basically? That's essentially what an allegory is. Like, what does the whole story represent? And even looking at the story, we're going to be looking at how the characters inside the story represent different aspects of that metaphor. So I'm going to kind of give you guys a little overview of like what a few of the types of allegories we're going to be looking at in the book. But again, like it says up here, it's basically where the story represents an idea or a generalization about life. There's usually a strong moral lesson, so like something that we all learn from the story. And that the characters, again, are also representing something about the metaphor. So for the political allegory, so this book was written around World War II. So after World War II, what ended up happening is there was a feud between communism, any country that was like a communist country, and a capitalist country. And it developed into what was called the Cold War. It wasn't like a bunch of like countries actually fighting each other, but it was like an arms race, which means that we build nukes, they build bigger nukes. They build their bigger nukes, we build even bigger nukes. And we just go back and forth and we keep building and building like more weapons and more advanced weapons. And so the political allegory is there's going to be a lot of ideas of like democracy versus like dictatorship in the book. So it's going to represent that political system. So like where one character will represent democracy and another character will represent that kind of like dictatorship or totalitarianism, which means they want total control. So, did you have a pass through or no?
No.
Okay. Then we're going. Well, no, it just if they had give you like a bus pass or something, but you're good. Okay. So again, another thing is that in the book there is an atomic blast. Now the atomic blast doesn't actually like it's there and they don't actually see it. They talk about it, but the whole idea of like if something bad happens, if things get out of hand, like again in an arms race, if things get like crazy between two countries, what's going to happen if two countries eventually like lose their temper and actually use their weapons of mass destruction? There's also a lot of religious allegories. So William Golding is the author of Lord of the Flies. He was fairly religious. He wasn't like, crazy zealous or anything about it, but he was still religious. So there is a lot of religious allegory in it where, again, the characters will represent different things. So it could be referencing the Garden of Eden. And if you don't want to talk about this, like maybe you're not religious or maybe you're not Christian, but there is, I would say more than anything, like more than any other religion, it definitely follows the Christian allegory of the Garden of Eden, which is where Adam and Eve were in the garden. It supposedly predates human beings, most human beings. And they were kicked out of the garden because they ate an apple, or actually a lot of scholars have said that it might have been a pomegranate, not an apple. But the point is they ate a forbidden fruit and they got kicked out of the garden. So all the boys in this story get stranded on an island, and the island, could be considered a paradise. They have all the food and everything that they need there. But as things go on, things get, again, out of hand. And, you could argue that in a way they get kicked out. And then the final type of allegory is the Freudian or psychological allegory. And Freud is known for a lot of things. One thing he's known for is kind of having weird thoughts about his mom, but we won't talk about that part of it today. What we are going to talk about is his theory of the personality. So basically what he thinks, what Freud would say, that all of you have three different personalities kind of fighting each other at the same time inside our minds. So what those three personalities are the id, the ego, and the superego. So the id is what a lot of your probably, if you have younger brothers or siblings or, brothers or sisters, cousins, whatever, they would probably fall under, a lot of them would fall under this category a lot more, that I want it now. Like, I don't care about the consequences. I don't care if I get in trouble. I'm going to do something. I want to get something. It's like, if you see something that's like hot, it's like, oh, I want that. And you just grab it, even though, it's hot. That's what the it is. It's like, you don't care about how it makes other people feel. You don't even care if it's going to be harmful to yourself. You want something, you're going to try and get it. The next one is the ego. The ego is a little bit more logical. It thinks things through before it tries to get what it wants. It still wants things, but it also considers your own well-being. So if I want this, what's going to happen if I try to get it? Is something bad going to happen? How can I plan for something not bad to happen to me and for me to get it? Right? So that's the ego. The superego is like the most not pure, but like the most well thought out, because not only does it think about, I want stuff, this is how I can get it, but then it has the moral aspect of it too. So like, how will this affect other people, not just myself? So this person, this part of your personality cares about not only yourself, but the people around you too, or even people you haven't met yet. So this is like, I don't care about anything but except for what I want. This is, I want something, but I need to be strategic at how I get it. And this is, I need to think about how this affects others as well as myself. So in the story, you can look at some of the different characters. So some of the characters will represent the id, the like, I want this now, screw everybody else kind of mentality. The superego, again, I care about other people. I want to make sure that other people's needs are taken care of as well as mine. And then the ego, I need to figure out how I can get what I want. So again, there will be a character, at least one character, that represents each of those things. So as we go through the story, we are going to be talking about what Lord of the Flies, and we might add more allegories too, like what the whole story could represent. And then we'll talk about what do the different characters represent in the story for those things. So again, does one represent democracy? Does one represent like communism or dictatorship? Does one represent Adam? Does one represent Eve if you're going with the religious allegory? Does a character or an action or does something on the island represent the forbidden fruit that they're not meant to get? So those are the kinds of things we're going to be talking about in Lord of the Flies. But I want to make sure that we have about 48 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start the recording right now for you guys to listen to. I want you guys again to follow along. iPads need to be in our bag. Our phones need to be in our pocket or in our bag. But just make sure you guys are following along. There will be a quiz, and it's not going to be like trick question quiz. It's just going to be make sure that you guys understand what's happening. It'll be open book if you need to use your book. So I don't believe in closed book tests. Honestly, I don't think that they prove anything. But anyways, so we're going to go ahead. We're going to get started. I'm just going to skip that one. Okay. Okay, so one in every class. Okay, so just make sure you bring it on Thursday, okay? Make sure you guys are bringing it. I'll send you a digital copy on Remind so you can get your iPad out. I'm going to get started for everybody else.
Chapter 1. The Sound of the Shell. The boy with fair hair lowered himself down the last few feet of rock and began to pick his way toward the lagoon. Though he had taken off his school sweater and trailed it now from one hand, his gray shirt stuck to him and his hair was plastered to his forehead. All around him, the long scar smashed into the jungle was a bath of heat. He was clambering heavily among the creepers and broken trunks when a bird, a vision of red and yellow, flashed upwards with a witch-like cry, and this cry was echoed by another. "Hi," it said. "Wait a minute." The undergrowth at the side of the scar was shaking, and a multitude of raindrops fell pattering. "Wait a minute," the voice said. "I got caught up." The fair boy stopped and jerked his stockings with an automatic gesture that made the jungle seem for a moment like the home counties. The voice spoke again. "I can't hardly move with all these creeper things." The owner of the voice came backing out of the undergrowth so that twigs scratched on a greasy windbreaker. The naked crooks of his knees were plump, caught and scratched by thorns. He bent down, removed the thorns carefully, and turned around. He was shorter than the fair boy and very fat. He came forward, searching out safe lodgments for his feet, and then looked up through thick spectacles. "Where's the man with the megaphone?" The fair boy shook his head. "This is an island. At least I think it's an island. That's a reef out in the sea. Perhaps there aren't any grown-ups anywhere." The fat boy looked startled. "There was that pilot, but he wasn't in the passenger cabin. He was up in front." The fair boy was peering at the reef through screwed-up eyes. "All them other kids," the fat boy went on. "Some of them must have got out. They must have, mustn't they?" The fair boy began to pick his way as casually as possible toward the water. He tried to be offhand and not too obviously uninterested, but the fat boy hurried after him. "Aren't there any grown-ups at all?" "I don't think so." The fair boy said this solemnly, but then the delight of a realized ambition overcame him. In the middle of the scar, he stood on